Hello and welcome to Snapdragon Studio YouTube channel. My name's Jane and today I am going to be talking about Tirzah Garwood again. If you have watched this channel for a while, you might remember that a few months ago I went down to London and I went to an exhibition all about Tirzah Garwood that was on at the Dulwich Picture Gallery. And if you're really interested in her, go and watch that video because it's got lots of photos and videos that I shot on the day. But she is an early 20th century artist from sort of like 1920s to 1950s. She died in 1952. She was the wife of Eric Ravilius, and he is a much more famous artist. Most art history and exhibitions have had her kind of as just like an extra to him, just one of a circle of people that were around him. But this exhibition just looked at her work, and it went right across the breadth of the kinds of work that she did. So wood engraving, illustration, needlework, embroideries, patchwork quilts, collages, paper sculptures, oil paintings, marbled papers, everything. And it's very unusual for an exhibition to do that. And I think that it's particularly important with a lot of women's work where mediums often change depending on where they have to work, the time that they have to work, and it's a response to family and domesticity. It's a wonderful exhibition. There was a catalogue. Here we go, Tirzah Garwood, Beyond Ravilius, which I'm sure will still be available everywhere. It's a really good catalogue. And she also wrote an autobiography really, really quickly. And that was published by Persephone Books. And again, it's very, very good. So, the reason that I am revisiting this is that I published that video and somebody sent it to one of my neighbours who lives sort of across the big road from us. And this neighbour turned up on my doorstep clutching a large carrier bag, and she said, "Jane, I am Tirzah Garwood's great niece, and I wondered if you would like to read these books." And in the carrier bag, there were two beautiful, beautiful folio books, like marbled paper, and when they've got that cloth binding, and they were just really big, chunky, fabulous things. One of them was like a folio version of this, complete with photographs, and then the other was like an art exhibition, so equivalent to this. But both of them were much, much bigger and much more detailed. And it turned out that the information that was in these folio books, which wasn't in the books that I had read, was kind of the quirkier, more domestic, smaller kind of details. And of course, that's what appeals to me. So I thought, well, I will come on here and I will talk about exactly what I found of interest in those books. So the books, as I said, absolutely gorgeous. Now I sort of had them out on the table and I was looking through photographs, really big, nice photographs. And I came to a photograph of a kitchen dresser with lots and lots of pottery on it. That kind of very traditionally kind of thing. And I thought, I'm sure that I have seen that dresser somewhere before. So I read the text because to that point I'd just been looking at the photographs. And yes, it was a photograph which had been taken in 1947 and had been published in a thing called the Saturday Book. Now, the Saturday Book, I think there's 34 Saturday books, maybe. It was published from 1920s to 1970s, one a year, and it's a little bit like, you remember when you were a child and you'd get an annual at Christmas? It's a little bit like a grown-up version of that. There's a whole load of different subjects, hugger-mugger, in it, and, so there'll be short stories and poetry, there'll be some art stuff, but it will be things like fish in art or faces in art and how to draw faces. There are photo stories. There are sort of like collector's guides. And I had bought one from 1947 because there had been a photo story in it of designing a dress from idea to catwalk in 1947, and I thought that was really interesting. So when I saw it secondhand, I'd bought it. But it also had, the same book, an article about collecting early 19th century pottery. And in that article was this photo of the dresser, which was also in the folio about Tirzah Garwood. And that meant that I had this kind of story unraveling about this dresser, whose it was, where it was, and how it came to be photographed. So this is the story as I know it. Yeah, there may be details that are not right. There's a woman called Olive Cook, and she worked in the National Gallery. She was the sort of in charge of publications in the National Gallery. And then when there was the Second World War and all of the paintings and sculptures from the National Gallery were evacuated, moved all around the country to keep them safe, she became really a sort of the publicity person for the National Galleries. So she was making sure that people remembered that the collections existed. She was instrumental in the concerts that were the spaces. The National Gallery, they became spaces for concerts. She also had a lot to do with the war artists who had been commissioned by the government to go and do pictures of wartime. One of whom was Eric Revilius. There was a whole load of them. Eric Revilius died in 1942 while on service as a war artist. And it's not clear exactly when Olive Cook and Tirzah Garwood became friends, but my suspicion is that from the late 30s, they were moving in the same kinds of circles. So by 1947, Olive Cook had left National Galleries and had really wanted to start being an artist, being a painter herself. But that doesn't bring in much money, as maybe some of you know, not to start with anyway. So she was working as a freelance writer. She did the writing for a lot of architecture books, but she also was one of the main writers for the Saturday Book. And she tended to write things that she was really interested in. And she was a great collector and promoter of early 19th century, not really art, but the kinds of things that people would get to decorate their houses, like Staffordshire figures or kind of the tinsel pictures, large Berlin wool work, all that kind of slightly garish, slightly camp kind of things. She loved all of that. So that's what she tended to write articles about. And she needed photographs, and she got lots of photographs from her contacts in the V&A and National Galleries, all of that. But she wanted a photograph that showed that you could collect this early 19th century pottery and put it next to something modern. So she needed a photo of it on a dresser. Now, Tirzah would be a really good, automatic go-to person, because Eric had designed all of these things for Wedgwood, and she still had them. She still had, I don't know, maybe they're prototypes, I don't know, but she has a good collection of Eric's Wedgwood designs. She also collected early 19th century pottery. All of that group that we think of as being really quite, mid-century modern artists, they all actually collected and were drawn to this much earlier, like 19th century camp stuff. So she would have had the pottery. We know that Olive was going for lunch. We don't know whether Olive was invited for lunch or whether it was kind of like, can we get a photograph and have lunch, or whether, in fact, Edwin maybe organised it. Edwin was Olive's partner, but he also took the photographs. So for this venture, he would have been sort of like forefront. But what we do know is there was no dresser. This is not a dresser. It is a bookcase. And Olive says it is a bookcase. I suspect it was a bookcase that has been painted to put all of this china in. All this pottery. Pottery has been arranged. And just before Olive and Edwin arrive, she decides it doesn't look quite right. So when they arrive for lunch, there is no lunch ready. But Tirzah is on the floor cutting out a bit of paper, which she then puts on the top of the dresser, which isn't a dresser because it's a bookshelf, but it makes it look like a dresser. You know, you have this kind of top, which is what you would have got on the traditional dressers. So what you see here is something that has been put together and then captioned as though it was something that was in somebody's house, as an example of what you could do. On the same photo shoot, Edwin also took photos of two other things, at least. There may be more, in Tirzah's house. And these are a cutout of a bull, cut out of marbled paper, which was above a sink in an attic, like an attic bedroom. And the other was a panelled door, you know, the traditional panelled doors, where the insides of the panels were covered with paper collage, again in marbling paper. So there was trees and houses and so on. So I find that just really interesting in the details. So it's kind of like Olive gets her photograph of the dresser, which she needs for her article. Tirzah also gets photographs taken of these cut paper things, which I suspect may have been related to some work that she was doing, writing articles about teaching children art. The dates fit very much. Or maybe they were for some other kind of publicity. These photographs are in the archive of the RIBA. So that's what Royal Institute of British Architects. They have these photographs. And I didn't know anything about these cutouts at all. So I think that's really, really interesting. There's something else that this kind of really rings true for me. Tirzah started a marbled paper business, and it was always going to be a business. It wasn't a hobby at all. She started that sort of like 1930s. She went to Paris to a trade show. She bought really, really expensive paper, 200 sheets of it, 50 centimetres square, approximately. So it's kind of size. And she was then selling that through some upmarket art craft shops, direct to paper collectors, to small presses, to publishers, to interior designers, who would then make up lampshades and screens and so on. And that was actually going really, really well. I mean, the receipts books and so on suggest that it was a good, solid business. But then there is the war, and the art shops close, and the paper collectors are no longer buying, and the market falls out of it. She stops marbling, apart from she mentioned getting all the tanks back out so that she can do some marbling, and that is purely because Eric is without his wages. They haven't been paid. He is, I think, in Dunfermline in Scotland, as part of his war artist thing, and he has run out of cigarettes. So she wants to be able to send him some cash for cigarettes, and the way that she can do that is to get out her marbling tank. So she must have had kind of contact. But as far as we know, from 1941, that's when she stopped. But clearly, she had a backlog of these things, or rather a stockpile of papers, but nowhere to actually sell them, because she starts sending packets of marbled papers to her friends with the instruction that they are to use them for blackout. And of course, the friends get them and they write back going, I can't possibly paste this to my windows. I'm going to save it for, a nicer project after all of this is finished. Which, if anybody, I'm sure lots of people here watching will understand that. You don't want to paste it up on your window. But that suggests that she had a stockpile. And then I think this 1947, when she is decorating on a low budget, or quickly, or for the photographers maybe, this house in Adelaide Road in London, she uses papers to do cutouts. Really quick, really effective, for something. And what I would say is, at any time that I have got publicity for my business, and I've been really lucky in that I've had the house photographed for magazines 3 times, and for Country Living magazine, Country Homes and Interiors, and Red magazine, all sent photographers and stylists and writers to come and photograph my home. And the photographs are beautiful, and they're definitely my home. They didn't bring things in. But in that period around the photo shoot, there was a lot of me deciding that I would, change things, or making up a cushion so that it would go on the settee and show off my work rather than whatever cushion had been there before. The finishing off of things. And then when the stylists come in, they really curate. They remove all kind of signs of life from your house. So things like dog toys would just be put into another room. Lots of the ornaments and possessions and envelopes and anything just goes off into another room. And then, because of the difference between the human eye and the camera's eye, there's a lot of sort of shuffling and changing and things. So what you see in the image isn't what you would have seen had you walked into my house 2 weeks before or 2 days afterwards. It's very much my house, but it's also not. And I think that that's what we see in all of this thing around Tirzah Garwood and her marbled paper stock, and this dresser, and her friendship with Olive Cook, who went on to be her main biographer, and how the connections all work, so that all of the sort of little bits of work that you can get freelance particularly as a woman, in this world, are connected together so that people can make a living. So I'd be really interested in the comments to know whether you have a space like this dresser where you curate your artistic influences, where you put things together, where you play about. So let me know in the comments, and until next week, bye-bye.